All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to our webinar today. I am Emily. I'm an Impact Programs Manager at the Beer Foundation. And we are just thrilled to talk today about the beef industry from pasture to plate, which is a webinar that we are doing with our amazing partners at the National Cattlemen's Beef Association on behalf of the Beef Checkoff. So we have an incredible lineup today, but before I allow them to introduce themselves, or not allow them, before I invite them to introduce themselves, I just want to talk a little bit about how this webinar is going to work today. So this session is being recorded, and we will send out a link to the recording to all of the registered attendees after we wrap this up. But if you're having any trouble, just let us know. We will save questions for the end as time allows. This webinar will be a little bit different. Normally they are an hour, but this one, because we have so many amazing panelists that we want to hear from, this webinar will be an hour and a half, so we should have plenty of time for questions at the end. We know that sometimes things come up. We're going to try to clarify things as we go along, but we would also encourage you to just send in your questions as they pop into your head. If you're having technical difficulties, just message us using the toolbar. You can use the question function to reach out to us as well about that, and we will do our best to help you troubleshoot that. And so with that, I would love to introduce our panelists today, and we'll just start going right across as it shows up on the screen. So Katie, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Well, good afternoon from Southeast Minnesota, where it's still lovely and green out, and there's not any snow yet, but it's on its way. I'm a fifth-generation farmer, which means that 5 histories of my family have been in the farming and agriculture business. So my husband, Ted, and I are both fifth-generation farmers, but we have bought our own farm together. So on our farm, we grow green grass when there's no snow here in Minnesota, and we have beef cows. So we have the black ones, which are called Angus, and the white ones, which are called Charolais. And we are the beginning of the beef life cycle. So we have the mom cows and the baby calves, as they're called. And so we really enjoy to raise them here. And then my husband and I also have jobs during the day. So we also like to call ourselves #flashlight farmers. So he works for the farm credit system, and I work for a seed and crop protection company in the training department. So we're really involved with agriculture, and we really enjoy helping people understand where their food comes from, and more importantly, how beef is raised.
Thank you so much, Katie. Buck, you're up next.
Okay, I think I got a couple of pictures if you want to show them. So I operate a cattle feedlot where the cattle are fed a carefully formulated ration that has grain in it and forage and vitamins and minerals and so forth. And this is where we finish the cattle and get them ready to go to processing to provide the meat and the cuts of beef and so forth that the chef prepares for you all. And so this is an important step, and in the United States, most of the beef that is consumed has been finished in a feedlot of some sort. And our people like the tender and tasty and juicy beef that we produce. And so that's our part of this process. So we'd be third in line. Josh will talk about this, I'm sure, but you know, Katie starts it off, and then we're the last step before it starts becoming the steak that goes on your plate. And we're in eastern Nebraska. I'm a 4th-generation cattle feeder, and I married a city girl. She doesn't know anything about it, but she's supportive of me. So something that I enjoy the people, our customers and our employees. I enjoy the cattle themselves, and then it's sort of a game. It's an arbitrage where you're buying cattle and feeding them and trying to make some money in the process. So it's 365 days a year. We feed them 3 times a day. And as you can see from this photograph, there's a bunk. A feed truck comes along there and feeds the cattle. And so they have a very nutritious food source. And we check them every day to see if one of them's sick or lame or anything and needs some help. So they're just like us. They get sick occasionally and need need a shot or need to have a little convalescent period. So they're well taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we will just introduce the rest of the panelists before we go into more of the questions. But Josh, you're up next.
Sure, thanks, Emily. I'm Josh White. I lead the producer education and sustainability team at National Cattlemen's Beef Association. I'm a self-professed cattle nerd. I bought my first heifer out of our family operation when I was 12 years old. So a heifer is a female that's young and hasn't had a calf yet, and started my herd. And I still have some cattle back in Georgia on our family operation, but felt called to use some of my gifts and talents to work on a lot of programs to help educate farmers and ranchers, and to speak to groups like you guys to help educate on how we raise beef and the great care our farmers and ranchers across the country take care of our cattle. One of the big programs that may be referenced, or you may hear if you're looking at how cattle are raised, is BQA. That stands for Beef Quality Assurance, and that's sort of an industry standard that farmers and ranchers developed themselves, along with veterinarians and nutritionists and PhD animal welfare experts, to make sure that we have a great training program for both new and established farmers and ranchers, all the way from how we feed cattle to keeping them healthy, to meat quality attributes, so that when we do take those cattle all the way through the various sectors we'll talk about and they get to the packing plant, that it's a great eating experience, safe, wholesome products. So that's a little bit about me. I don't know if you wanted me to cover off on those slides yet, or we're going to come back to that, Emily.
Yeah, let's come back to that. I just want to make sure we have
Okay.
a chance to use our chef talent today. So Chef Lamar, you want to go first and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Lamar Moore. I'm the head chef of Bugsy and Meyer Steakhouse here in Flamingo, Las Vegas. Just give you a little idea of the restaurant. The name is a nod to Flamingo, Las Vegas founders Benjamin Bugsy Siegel and business partner Meyer Lansky, who famously created the first resort-style hold on the Strip back in 1946. It has forever changed Las Vegas. As far as steaks and beef is concerned, Bugsy and Meyer's, our menu features a lot of classics and throwbacks. A raw bar. We have an in-house 60-day dry aging program showcased in a glass encased show cooler. Hand-selected cuts. Sorry, excuse me. Our hand-selected cuts include domestic prime, wet age, and dry age prime, imported wagyu, and more. Just to give you a synopsis.
Awesome. And our first question actually came in, and it just says Lamar with about 10 exclamation points. So I think you have a fan in the audience. So it's great. And last but not least, Dr. Conyers.
Hi, thanks for having me. I kind of do a lot, but I'm a pit master, also work in aerospace as an engineer, but I cook whole animal varieties, and I really focus a lot of my work on the history of American barbecue. Cook anything from whole hogs. I grew up from my family farming, South Carolina, and eventually I cook whole cows too. Well, I have cooked whole cows here recently, and so as a pit master, knowing that source of the farmer is really important, and also knowing the quality of meat. And so that's the reason I'm here, is partially as a pit master, as also as an end consumer, and give you all my thoughts as being knowing meat quality very well. So thanks for having me, and I do a lot of stuff in media, so don't be surprised if you see me on PBS or something from things in the past on cooking whole animals or man-fire food. So thanks.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So you're bored because you're an engineer and a PhD and a pit master, but no, that was a joke. Never dull. All right, so we will move really quickly, not quickly, we'll move on to Josh if you want to run through your slides. And Josh is going to tell us a little bit about the life cycle and some other details that he wants to share.
Yeah, thanks again. We already have used a little bit of jargon, industry jargon, so thought it was a good idea just to start from the basics and cover off on how cattle are raised at a very high level. And then Katie and Buck already mentioned some of the roles they play, and so feel free to drill down and ask any questions you want, but I thought I would just hit a few highlights. Katie mentioned being at the cow-calf end of things. A lot of folks are surprised to hear that there are cattle in all 50 states. You know, the cow-calf sector is by far the largest, and that's what you find in almost all 50 states. And that's, again, where, as Katie mentioned, you have a herd of mother cows that you breed to a bull or artificially breed through artificial insemination and then raise calves off of those cows. About 70% of the U.S. cow herd has their babies or their calf crop in the spring. So most calves are born in the spring, and that allows those mama cows to take advantage of grazing, good grazing in the spring into the summer. Virtually all of those cows are out on grass. So we like to say we're a grass-based industry. While a lot of those cattle the calves end up in a feed yard like bucks, they start out on grass with their mamas, and they're there from usually 5 to 7 months, depending on the year. You may have heard this year about some of the drought in the West. And so when producers are faced with drought conditions, they will often wean those calves. So that's when the process of taking them away from their mothers and getting them on a forage or grain ration. Sometimes they have to do that a little earlier if there's not grass out there because of drought or other, natural disasters like the forest fires and things. If folks were scheduled to graze in areas that have been subject to the fires, they may have had to bring those cattle to an area that was not subject to fire and then go ahead and wean those calves even a little bit earlier. And they'll weigh usually on average around 550 pounds is a good industry average for what the calves weigh when they are weaned. When they're born, we often get this question too. They're about 70 to 85 pounds, somewhere in that range as a good average, depending on the breeds. And Katie already started talking about some breeds. It's always fun to talk about the different breeds of cattle we have in the U.S. There are about 20 breeds that are really popular out there. So a lot to choose from, and over 100 if you count every hobby option there is for a breed. Once those calves are weaned, they go to this number 2 on the slide, typically a stocker or backgrounder. And usually that is grass or forage based. When I say forage, I mean like hay or silage. So it would be grass that's harvested and fed to the cattle. But a lot of those cattle stay on grass, and the cow-calf operation, the cow-calf farm or ranch may have an abundance of grass. If it's a really good year, they may choose to wean those calves and keep them on grass there, and they sort of retain ownership through that phase of stocker or backgrounder. The goal of that stocker or backgrounder is to put some weight and maturity, let those calves grow on a ration that wouldn't cost as much as the one that buck feeds them. So rations that buck feeds are going to be geared more toward putting on, muscle and fat to get them ready for slaughter. But a lot of times those calves, especially as I mentioned, if they're weaned earlier, they need some time to grow their skeletal structure just to get older. They're kind of teenagers. They go through a growth spurt. And, if I've got a 14-year-old right now that wants to play football, he is pushing 6 feet tall and weighs 115 pounds because he's just hit that growth spurt, and we're trying to keep him from breaking in half. But, cattle and pretty much all species, you can chart a growth curve like that where they're a little gangly and they go through that. And so the stocker and backgrounders, they're focused on cattle health, providing them good nutrition and getting them through that teenage phase before they go to buck. Next slide, please. Very often, either from number 1 to number 2, that cow-calf to stocker backgrounder, or even again between stocker backgrounder to the feed yard, cattle are sold through a livestock, either a traditional livestock auction market like we are showing here, or in today's age, there are video auction markets that you can go online and look up, and they'll sell cattle either one at a time or sometimes in truckload lots. So depending on how much cattle weigh, that can be anywhere from 60 to 80 head of lighter weight cattle down to like 35, 40 head of really heavier cattle. But you can buy truckload lots of cattle through an auction system, and that typically involves you seeing pictures or videos of those cattle with a description of the cattle. In the scenario you're seeing here, you're seeing one cow sold through an auction market, and these guys are sitting around appraising that cow and bidding in an auction system. So there are a lot of different ways cattle are sold, but like to acknowledge that they do go through that process, and then typically, as Buck mentioned, end up in the feed yard. You know, we're seeing right now grass-fed product through retail makes up about 1% of the retail shelf space out there. So, you know, nothing against grass-fed, but as Buck mentioned, most of our American consumers enjoy that grain-finished product, and even our export markets also really prize marbled grain-finished product, and we get a premium for that around the world because we are unique in our ability to deliver that high-quality product at a cost-competitive rate around the world. But here on the screen, you can see just a few of the specs there. You know, cattle, depending on how old they are coming out of those other phases, they can be anywhere from 6 really to 18 months of age, depending on how long they're kept in the stocker backgrounder phase. And they spend 4 to 6 months typically at Buck's feed yard, again, depending on the weight they enter and market conditions, feed costs. There's variables every year. As Buck said, it's a challenge every year to stay in business in the cattle feeding industry. And, you know, folks like Buck work with nutritionists, or sometimes the folks managing those operations are either a master's level or PhD ruminant nutritionist. That's a whole nother talk, and we can get into it if you'd like, but ruminant nutrition is really fascinating because we're not actually feeding a cow, we're feeding a rumen that's full of a whole microbiome of bacteria, yeast, protozoa that digest what the cow eats. And that's really what separates them, makes them unique and able to graze and convert a lot of feedstuff that humans can eat into high quality protein. So we'd love to get into some of that discussion, and some of the other presenters and producers might want to do that. I think we've got one more slide here that shows the packing plant and has a few industry stats if you want to advance the slide. Yep, there's one more step typically to get them from a live animal that we take really good care of into a high quality product, and that's the packing industry. We don't have a representative, I don't think, on the call from that industry, but we'll try to catch a few of those questions as best we can. Buck deals directly with them. He sells into to those packers, and I have a good relationship with some packers that work with us on some of the quality assurance products. So we do visit with them and make sure that those cattle are taken good care of all the way to humane slaughter. A few facts at the bottom I already mentioned, all 50 states. You know, a lot of folks are surprised that over 90% of farms and ranches, including the feed yards and everything, are family owned and operated. A lot of people think it's more corporate, but a lot of those corporations are folks like Katie and her husband incorporating for tax advantages, and so a lot of times that is misrepresented in the media. The average herd size for the cow-calf sector is about 40 head of cattle. It takes anywhere from 1 acre in the east to support a cow-calf pair where it rains a lot and there's ideal conditions, all the way up to over 100 acres in the desert west where we still run some cattle on some scrubby land, and they can take advantage of what ends up being some nutritious forbs and growth, but they have to cover a lot of territory to get to graze all of that. A lot of these I've already mentioned. We do export a tremendous amount of product, 130 countries, and roughly 15% of our production, depending on the year, and a whole lot of value, over $350 per head of a fed animal goes into export. That includes hides and a lot of products like livers and tongues that we may not see on the menus here that are used in export. So just a quick overview, and looking forward to hearing from the rest of the panel and answering any questions you might have.
Thank you so much. I went through a whole page of notes writing all of this down because I feel like I'm learning so much, but that was great. Awesome. Yeah, so if you have any questions on what Josh just presented, just send them through and we will get to them. Buck, I know you walked us through your pictures earlier, but we did have one clarifying question from April who wanted to know where the feedlot was that you showed your photo of.
Oh, good. Yeah, we're in eastern Nebraska. We're about 30 miles west of Omaha, and Omaha sits right on the Missouri River, and on the other side of the Missouri River is Iowa. So that's our area. A lot of corn growing around here, and a lot of processors, and we have access to cattle from the Virginias down to Okeechobee, Florida, to California. So we're kind of in the heart of things here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So now I think we can move on to Katie, who also had some photos she wanted to share with us today.
Yeah, so if you want to pull those up. So this is was just actually taken not that long ago. So Josh talked about how most producers or ranchers in the United States have a spring calving herd, which means baby calves are born in the spring. My husband and I are a little unique in the aspect that we are a fall calving herd. So we actually will have our babies in the month of August. It's a choice, which is pretty cool that we get to choose when we want to have baby calves. And we do that here just from a workload standpoint. And we feel that it just helps our cash flow and our marketing and our sustainability plan just work better for us. So I don't know if you can see behind me, but there should be some baby calves hiding out there in the grass. So they're anywhere from 3 weeks old to about 2 months right now. And they're growing good on some nice green grass. So the white ones, again, are just Charolais. They're just kind of a breed, kind of like how some people have brown hair and blue eyes. And the black ones are the Angus. So we do a little bit of both here on the farm just to diversify. So I want to go to the next one. And we live next to the Mississippi River over here in eastern Minnesota, so we do not have many flat spots on our farm, which does not make it very suitable for crop farming. So that's why we pride ourselves on growing the green grass, and then we let the cows consume that grass, helping with the carbon footprint, and they turn it into nutritious beef.
Great. Thank you guys so much for that. I love these photos. They're really beautifully done. I'm so jealous of Katie's background, which leads me to apologize for the construction that's happening outside of my apartment, which decided to start at exactly 2 p.m. today when this webinar started. So if you hear that, I'm sorry. It's a nice contrast to where Katie is sitting right now, so I'm pretty jealous. So we are going to ask some questions to Buck and Katie about their experience and their relationship to consumers and to beef in general. And so we will just dive right in there. But of course, if any of the panelists have any thoughts or want to chime in on the questions, please do so. So this first question is to both of you, but we'll start with Buck, which is, what is one thing that you wish consumers knew about how beef is raised today? I know we touched on that a little bit, but I'd love for you to expand on that.
Yeah, there's probably 5 or 10 number one things, but I'll take a stab at. I guess I'd amplify a little of what Josh said. All cattle are grass fed. So as he went through the life cycle, they're all born out on the broad domain, and they're on their mother and getting nourishment from her, but they also learn to eat grass very quickly. So they're all grass fed. And then at some point in their lives, as he said, that most of them here in the United States will come into a feedlot and they'll be fed a grain-based diet, but that still has 20% or more of it is forage of some sort. And so I think the University of Nebraska will tell you that 2/3 to 3/4 of the weight of any animal that goes to processing out of feedlot actually came from forage. So there's a distinction between grass finished beef and grain finished beef, but all beef is grass fed. And so on a broader note, I think that makes the cow, the bovine, the greatest steward of the earth's resources, because of when you go, I mentioned Okeechobee, Florida, you go to the Kaibab on the Grand Canyon and all points in between, and you see where cattle can make a living and turn cellulose that we can't utilize into high quality, nutritious beef. It's kind of their superpower. And so I think they're the greatest steward of the earth's resources. We feed them carrots in Bakersfield and potatoes in Idaho and sweet potatoes in Arkansas. And that fermentation vat we call the rumen allows them to utilize all that and turn it into good beef. And the finishing process in feedlots really puts the finishing touch on them, literally, and gives that good marbling that Americans like.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, and I know it's hard to just choose one, but that was a question that came in, so thank you for clarifying that. Awesome. Katie, what about you? What do you think, if there was one thing that you wish consumers knew, what would it be? I think you might be muted, but let's see. I think I can. Did that work? All right. Well, while we do that, and Katie just you're back. Okay, cool.
Sorry. So yeah, one thing I think I really want consumers to know is that no matter the size, no matter what part of the beef life cycle, all farmers and ranchers really they do their best, right? Caring for these cows behind me is what I do. It's what I love to do, and it's what I want consumers to know. And I think I enjoy answering questions from consumers. So I'm very spoiled because I live out here and on a farm, but within 30 miles, I can be to Rochester, Minnesota, where the Mayo Clinic is. And in an hour, I can be to the Minneapolis, Twin Cities area. So really an opportunity to allow consumers to ask their questions. Our farm gate is always open. And if that needs to be virtual or in person, we just really enjoy helping people, from politicians to the doctors to just a mom or a chef, really understand that how beef is grown and the different cuts and the different cattle. At the end of the day, it's all beef, right? It's all protein on your plate. So really just having consumers understand what I do and why I do it and how I do it. Just give the farmers and ranchers a chance to answer your questions before you make up misconceptions or before you make up your mind. Farmers and ranchers love to talk, and we love to share what we do. So really just encourage consumers to ask their questions to the people who do this every day. And I think you'll have some great conversations and be able to have some more knowledge.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. We'll stick with you before I try to address some of these questions that are coming in, but from your perspective, what are some challenges that are facing the beef industry today? And, sort of on the flip side of that, what are the opportunities? And before you get into that, I know that we talked a little bit about, the impact of COVID, and that both Buck and Katie, you both said, well, we weren't really that impacted by COVID. So beyond that, what are some of those opportunities and challenges, Katie?
Yeah, so I'd say the biggest challenge here on our farm for my husband and I is just getting everything done between jobs off the farm in agriculture and then taking care of the cattle. Some days I'm not sure when but it's just getting all of that done, right? The cooperative where we might buy some mineral and vitamins for the cows, they close at 5 o'clock. Right? The veterinarian, the animal doctor, right? He doesn't like to come out past 4:30, and he doesn't like to start in the dark in the morning. So it's just trying to balance everything that needs to be done on the farm, and then yet everything else that everyone has going on in their life. Sometimes it's a quick meal right at 10 o'clock at night because we're tired. We've had a long day. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges for us, is just getting everything done. And then as we prepare for winter, right, this time of year, the fall just adds a little more workload. And then in the winter, taking care of the cattle takes more time, right? I enjoy the month of June. Cows go to green grass. Get to have a little more fun in my day. I'd say another challenge is just the financial aspect. My husband and I are young. We're doing this together without additional family help or family financial support. So I tell people, which it's the truth, right? My name's on the mortgage, but so's the bank. So I think just the financial cost it takes to get involved in agriculture And then when the markets change, when it's time to sell the beef off the farm to go to buck, or that next part of the segment of the life cycle, it's a financial sometimes burden, right? And it's the additional stress of how are we going to pay for these things? How do we continue to supply a great product to the chefs and to consumers? But on the flip side, the opportunities are awesome. I get to show people the great part of having a baby calf born, to the aspects of just answering questions about how is my food produced? How does it end up on the grocery store shelf? And Katie, do I buy ground beef or do I buy a tri-tip, right? And how do I prepare that? Those are some of the great opportunities that I get to help share with the consumer, because I've done this my whole life. And so it's just a really fun opportunity to share with them my favorite recipes.
Thanks, I love that. And I definitely want to get back to, at the end when we open it up for questions, some of those financial challenges for young farmers, because I know that is top of mind for a lot of folks in our industry. So I don't want to forget about that, but I need a note to come back to. Before we move on to the plate portion, we're on the pasture portion. Before we move on to the plate part, Buck, I wanted to ask you, what do you think consumers are expecting from their food producers today? How is it different from in the past, and what sort of interesting things can you tell us there? Oh, I think you're muted. No worries. It's got to happen at least once, or else it's not.
Yeah, you can't read my lips. Okay, now can you hear me? Okay, so through Checkoff funded research, looking at what the consumer, what our customers want, and I kind of look at it too. What do I want? What's my wife want? What do my kids want? And I think a lot of it is that we do what we do. We do our work with integrity and with regard for the animals and the people we work with, and them, the consumer. And so it's really the sustainability idea that we take care of the environment, we take care of the animals, we take care of the community. And so I think that Katie touched on that. I don't know any producers that don't really care about their animals. I mean, they really do. You wouldn't be in this business and deal with the weather and 365 days a year if you didn't like the animals. And so there's a high degree of integrity in this business. Everybody has a bad actor here and there, and we get them once in a while too. But you don't want to not let anybody to have pets because some weirdo has 100 cats in their house. And so I would say that would be something that they expect of us, that we're doing things right and proper, which we are. Josh mentioned the nutritionists and veterinarians that we work with, and those guys are PhDs. My PhD is a post hole digger, and so I depend on those people a lot in helping us make sure the rations are balanced and that our vaccination programs work and so on and so forth, and we're using antibiotics properly. And so I guess that'd be the thing that jumps out at me.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's all really important stuff. All right, so we're about 5 minutes ahead of schedule, so I think I can go through some of these questions that are for Buck and Katie now, which is great. But we had another question come in from April, and I would pose this to either of you, either Buck or Katie, but are a lot of producers using heritage breed cows, or is there anything else you can tell us about the different kinds of breeds of cows and anything else about that?
I'll start and you can correct me, Katie. How's that? Yeah, so there's not a lot of that, like there's, the Berkshire hogs and things like that, but there's some of it. My grandfather fed cattle that were 2- and 3-year-old steers. And now if you feed something that old, there's a discount for it. Our beef is very young. And so I know over in Spain, there's kind of a movement towards older beef. I mean, they're like cows, and it has a distinctive flavor, a very beefy, strong flavor. I'm really interested. I'd love to be with Chef Lamar, because I've always wanted to dry age and it scares me to death. So I'd love to see what he's doing, but that imparts a different flavor. And And so I think that there'll be more of that. And, you know, you're going to have the people that just want their good hamburger and good steaks and whatnot, but there's people wanting something different. Grass finished, for instance, has a different flavor, and it's all good. It's all beef and it's all healthy. So I think there might be more of that. I'm not aware of it, a lot of it going on right now.
So to tag on to what Buck said, is what I think is great about beef in America is there's choices, right? So my neighbors have Highlander cattle, so they have really long hair, and they market beef off their farm to consumers in the Twin Cities that are looking for an all-natural, grass-fed product. Now that beef is going to taste very different than the beef that comes off my farm, even though the grass looks the same over the electric fence, right? So I think it's just really unique of what people choose to raise and what people choose to buy. So we use the Charolais, the white cows on our farm, and those genetics, because that's just something I fell in love with. I like a white cow and green grass. I think there's something pretty picturesque about it. And I actually grew up showing cattle, and that's just kind of what we've always showed at the county fair. So, and I've just really come to love that breed and that genetic lineup. And so it's kind of like being a DNA scientist when it comes time for breeding decisions, is we get to look at family genetics, just like us in the human side. The Angus became part of this farm because we needed to try something different. We've tried a few different breeds of cattle, and the Angus just market really well when it comes time to sell them off the farm to our cattle buyers through an online auction. So it's just something that we did here on the farm, and we chose to diversify. So some farmers and ranchers have one color of cow, and some will have multiple colors of cow in the cow-calf part of the business. We just like to have two different colors because it provides us just a different diversification when it comes to marketing.
Thank you so much. Great. All right, so we are going to switch gears a bit and take this over to Chef Lamar and Dr. Conyers, and I'm going to address all these questions to both of you, so feel free to just jump in whenever. But the first thing that I wanted to ask, which is, we talked a lot about consumers. Chefs are also consumers, obviously, just in a different way. But why is it important for chefs specifically to learn about how food is produced? I think we know obviously it's going to be important in terms of taste and flavor, but what other context can you provide around that? And I think we can start with Dr. Conyers, because he's showing up first for me.
Okay. So I'm gonna go back and kind of speak to first about heritage breed cattle, and it's a selection process. When researching a cattle, when I wanted to cook a whole cow, for example, I wanted to cook a heritage breed animal, and in the Gulf region they have something called a Pineywood cattle. But the Pineywood cattle, when you go to cook it, and what we have been trained to eat as Americans, the fat content is not there. It's very lean. And so that flavor profile, as well as the leanness of the meat, made me ultimately made a decision on what type cattle I was gonna cook. And it was an Angus. It was a smaller Angus, so I wanted the size of it. But the other part of the equation was with these heritage breed cattle, for example, and it may not be as economical for the farmer, and the consumer gonna have to pay more for it. But the time of the year that they're able to harvest that particular animal or slaughter that animal. Because depending on the time of the year you go to harvest that Pineywood cattle, it may not have the optimum fat content. I forgot your question. What was your question again, Kate? Sorry.
No worries. I think that was great.
I'm like
so fast because I'm learning so much. No, the question was, why is it important or why do you think it's important for chefs to learn and be aware of how their food is produced?
Ultimately, as a pit master, I want to know how that animal is produced and what the animal eats, because if the farmer does a great job with raising that animal, then I have less work to do as the end person. I mean, honestly, like if I know that animal is raised on grass and finished on grain, then I know what I really have to do. I don't have to do much if it's magically, if the farmer does a great job. And not all farmers are the same. And most of the farmers I have dealt with, they really want people to come out to see their places, to really see how they do it. I think a lot of people don't take advantage of that opportunity, at least from the farmers that I have talked to. Every time I have talked to farmers saying, come out and visit our operations, they're like, just please, we want you to see our operations so you know firsthand what we're doing with our operations. And I think another thing people don't realize, and Katie, correct me if I'm wrong, when you're doing the cows can come almost every day. I mean, calves can be born almost every day, and it's up to the farmer to go out there every day to check to see where that calf is being born. And that was a new appreciation I gained when I went out with one of my cattle farmers. I didn't know they really had to go out and check the fields every day, or the pastures every day rather.
Yeah, I love that there's a technical need to sort of go out there and see what they're doing, but there's also this like communal and emotional kind of psychological thing that happens when you can see the work and the care that somebody is putting into something. So I love that. It's great. And I'll pose the same to you, Chef Lamar. What do you think? Why is it important to learn about all of this stuff?
I think Katie and Dr. Howard brought up, a lot of great points. I mean, one, two, as far as chefs, excuse me, chefs being close to the farmers. I mean, I'll talk most recently, obviously, with COVID. It's been very, very difficult for us as chefs to be able to visit farmers. It's super important to know, where our beef is coming from, how it's curated, and the families behind it. And I think, from a guest point of view, and also chefs, sometimes we may forget the hard work that the farmers are, investing their time. And as Katie mentioned, and money too being involved in that. Excuse me, from a flavor profile, we definitely, want to know how the cows are being raised. And again, we talk about what we do here in Vegas and Bugsy and Myers, and we talk about curating the menu. We have a huge cage where we have dry aging and wet aging. And I'll tell you, from somebody like myself in Chicago, I grew up in a town where it's, heavily steak and potatoes. And, when we look at our menu mix here in Vegas, we have all different types of cuts, bone in and also, boneless. And I grew up eating a lot of ribeye. So give you an example, we have a 16-ounce ribeye on the menu, and based off of some of the information that we gather data from the farmers through the companies we order our beef product from, our guest perception is that the ribeye is too fatty, where someone like myself coming from Chicago, we enjoy, the fattiness. So then, we're working with, our purveyors and also the farmers, and we're finding out that because of COVID, it's changed how the cows are, are pasteurized, and they're carrying a lot more fat than they usually would. So what we do is either we trim it a little bit more or we switch up our cuts, which is something that, after being open for 3 months, we're looking at different types of cuts that we get, from our purveyors, how we're dry aging them in our cage, and how we're wet aging in our cage as well. I'm finding out here that we sell, for whatever reason, fillets are like the thing in Las Vegas. So we fly through fillets like crazy. Then we talk dry aging. We have a really nice bone-in 18-ounce New York strip where, for me personally, when we talk about as a chef, like I prefer my steaks, medium rare to rare. And so trying to get the guests to understand, what dry aging means and, how the funk is very, very heavy in the flavor profile. And then going back to Dr. Howard's point, because the farmers does such a great job, our steaks are cooked, at a very, very high heat and very, very simple. We glaze with a little bit of red wine butter and some salt and pepper, or kosher salt and black pepper, and that's it. Every once in a while, we get some guests that, want us to change flavor profiles. We may add, Cajun spice to it, or like a, heavy peppercorn, but, we engage more in the sauces on the side, but we want the beef to, speak to itself. And I know personally for me, if I'm eating steak or beef, I don't want to do too much to it because I want to show, the love and time that the farmers are put into, making sure that we're getting the best quality beef possible. And I want to taste a lot of that flavor that's injected into the cows. So, that's some of the things that, I look at as a chef, that we look at as a chef team, and what we look as an operation. And, especially being here in Vegas and then coming from Chicago, it's a very, very high-end steak town. And, we want to make sure we have the best of the best. And the farmers we try to stay as close to the farmers as possible, even not being able to visit, during this tough time.
Totally. I am so hungry from this conversation. I'm like dying for a fillet, like a blue cheese martini or something. Blue cheese olive martini sounds great. Classic steakhouse food.
We can definitely do that for you.
I'm right over. It's great. So you both touched on this a little bit also, but is there anything else, anything more that you want to share about why sourcing quality beef is important? We talked about, why the general food system and how that affects, your day to day, but about beef specifically, was there anything else you wanted to add there? I know we talked about it a bit, but.
Sure. I think Katie used a great word in choices, and there are more and more choices now. And so whether it's all natural or organic or grass finished or grain finished and so forth, and you can go to any supermarket and get high quality beef, but then you can go another step and see where it came from and meet the people that raised it. Our cattle in this feed yard, about 2/3 of them belong to our customers that are across the country, and about a third of them belong to the feed yard. And they are sourced all over the country and are all different kinds of breeds. I think now that the black-hided cattle with an Angus influence are probably, Josh, 3/4 of the herd now, because of the marbling and so forth. And so I think that the options out there are widespread, and the cooking options are widespread. And one of the things we do in the checkoff is try and provide a lot of opportunities with little education about cuts and recipes and how to prepare it and so forth. And we've had a lot of information on the Beef It's What's for Dinner webpage that people could use when they couldn't go to restaurants and they were cooking more at home. And so the checkoff money that we've spent on that the producers have spent has paid off a lot for us. So I think it's a very varied product. The cuts are all over the place. We export things that we don't eat in this country, tongues and hearts and livers and things, intestines and whatnot, but they're available too if you want to learn to eat them. So a lot of options.
Thank you.
If I could
Yeah.
add, we talked about the the Beef Checkoff. I actually worked beside, Beef It's What's for Dinner and Cattlemen Beef Association. And early this year, we kind of did a play on, one item used for another in exchange for another. And so like the video I did was taking, calamari and turning to calamari and using, a New York strip in place of that as a fun little play on that, but also, being able to showcase something different. And most people don't think about, per se frying a steak, but this recipe actually worked, and it's fun and it's whimsical, and it gives, especially now. We wouldn't have, obviously we didn't know we were going to go into the pandemic where we are now, but it gives, when we talk about farmers, I think Buck brought up a great point. I think about a lot of people reach out to me about what can we cook at home, what type of steaks do you choose. And what's great, being from Chicago, being here in Vegas, I'm able to locate and source a lot of the same product that we get, in the restaurant and you can find in a lot of stores, which gives guests a different point of view. So we talk about finding those recipes online, and, chefs like myself and other ones have all curated recipes from, their different areas, give people, more of an insight of how easily attainable those steaks and beef product is. And then, us being creative to, have recipes that makes it easier for guests. Because I think now more than ever, people are looking to cook more at home. I can tell you, as much as I work, I do find time to cook at home from time to time. I may throw a steak on the grill. I think I had short ribs in the oven last week because that's what I had a taste for. But it gives, a little bit closer reach. So, that's where, things like this and the checkoff helps, to really, really close that gap from, the
Your sound cut out for me a little bit. I don't know if it cut out for you, for the rest of you guys, for Chef.
Chef's bit on the calamari was great, and then there's Peking chuck and Korean fried beef. There's some pretty cool recipes.
Yeah, and so I was gonna say something on that actually, Buck. I think it's important with the consumers also to look outside of the cultures they normally grow up in and try. They really use these parts of the animal in ways that we don't take, for example. But one of my favorite like beef dishes outside of the steak is, and I grew up eating it all my life, was just like calf liver smothered down in onions and gravy over a dry bed of rice. But and when Chef Lamar talked about a calamari dish, I was like, maybe somebody should do some fried liver strips and do that. But that is a really good dish. I enjoy it every time I get it, every time I eat it, every time my mom cooks it. I'm down for it. It's simple, it's easy, and it may not be traditional for a lot of folks, but it's something traditional. At least I've seen it in the South.
I think it's great. A little trade secret: I'm not a cook. My husband is the cook. But what we have found is just experimenting, and the Beef It's What's for Dinner recipes have actually taught me how to cook a little bit more other than just ground beef. That's my safe zone. But it's just kind of fun to see, especially during the pandemic, what's out there social media wise, but also going back to the Beef Checkoff and just some of the different chefs' pages. I think you just got to experiment, right? And you just got to try something. And if nothing else, I just tell people add a little more butter and it'll be okay.
That's great. I was going to say, to the social media thing, I get all of my cooking tips from TikTok now. I just get everything from there. So, because you can watch them doing it, and it's really great. And there's a lot of good stuff on there. And it's also, this reminds me that a good plug for our webinar with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association next week, where we're going to talk about underutilized cuts, and we'll address some of these issues of both food waste, but also about getting creative, because I know, like many of us, I'm very bored with my usual things that I make at home. So thanks for that, everybody. And before we open this up to the audience, I just had a few more questions, both for Dr. Conyers and for Chef Lamar, which is, can you tell us a little bit more about your relationships with your suppliers? I know you talked about going to the farm, but I just wanted to see if you could talk a little bit more about that. And we can start with you, Dr. Conyers, if that works.
So in the midst of COVID, it got harder, but I would tell you the relationships I built with my suppliers before COVID really paid off well. So my suppliers, I have visited most of my suppliers, whether it's cattle or just vegetables, but during the midst of COVID, when things was getting slower, they made sure to bring, when they came into the city of New Orleans, they called me and said, this is why, this is what I have, this is what, do you want it? And I can get it. But I would say you definitely need to form a relationship with your local producer in your community, even if it's an hour, 2 hours away from where you're located at. It's really important in times like this, because you really perform almost like a family. And that farmer is successful if you're successful. So that's one of the things I really enjoy about getting to know my producers. Furthermore, I know that there are people of good integrity, and that probably is even more important than the animal they raise, because I know if there are people of good integrity, then they're also going to treat the animal with a lot of respect.
Yeah, thanks for that. Makes a lot of logical sense. What about you, Chef? How about your relationship with your suppliers? Can you talk about that?
You know, I'll tell you actually a quick story about that. So we use Out West meat company here in Las Vegas, and going back, I think it wasn't a ribeye, I believe it was the New York strip we ordered. And my executive chef and exec sous chef and I were looking at steaks, and they were way too fatty, which came into the conversation I mentioned earlier about some of the ribeyes being a little too fatty. And we consistently look at them. My executive chef made a call and said, hey, here's a picture of our steaks. They just seemed a little off. And what was awesome, within 20 minutes, both the directors of Out West were in the back door. Not only were they in the back door, they were in with their laptops. They had a couple more cases of steaks that they brought in. We were able to go and pull the data very quickly from the farm and where it came from, when the cows were raised, how they were produced. And I thought it was one of the most awesome feelings, for one, because they were able to, locate and source, the farm where it was coming from. And two, they brought new steaks. And three, they were able to be on site during COVID. Right now it's very difficult trying to be face to face with anyone. And obviously we're, more in a virtual realm. And I thought that was very awesome that they were able to do that. So to say that, it's very important that, we have that relationship. And I'm glad that, our relationship is super strong. And, I think you all brought a great point about, you know, we want to have the best of the best. In order to be able to do that, you know, one of the biggest things is having transparency on both sides. I think, you know, it's easy for us to, you know, charge whatever price we want to charge to a degree, you know, on the menu, but then also have an understanding to where, you know, our guest perception is, you know, as just as good as what we're getting through the back door. And so we try, you know, obviously other, you know, purveyors too, when it comes to produce and things like that. And then we also stay even closer, especially, you know, most recently on the West Coast, there have been a lot of fires. So that has affected how, I'm sure, how a lot of, you know, cows and farmers are taking care of their cattle. Because I would say the same for us. In order for us to, you know, with the cows that are feeding, you know, getting grass or getting corn, they're probably coming from the West Coast since we are here. So we're constantly in contact with our, you know, farmers and purveyors as to, you know, how those things happen. And, you know, in the other piece too, you know, again, I think Katie mentioned again about, you know, them being able to financially take care of, you know, their families. You know, we've been very fortunate that, you know, there hasn't been much of a hit, you know, financially from the farmers to getting to us. So, you know, we want to make sure that no matter what, you know, they're taken care of just as much as we are taken care of. So our relationship's been great and gotten a lot stronger. So it's been good.
Yeah, that's great. I think a lot of the time it's hard for consumers to realize that when they're paying for high quality beef, part of that cost is about this relationship between the chef and the supplier, and, you know, having that, making sure that you're ensuring all of that quality. And so it's hard sometimes for that message to get across, that like when you're paying for high quality beef, it's also because you're placing a lot of value on this relationship between the chef and the supplier, and just keeping an eye on, you know, how the animals are treated in those conditions. So I think it's good to know, good to share with everybody. All right, so before we open it up to questions really quickly, you mentioned a little bit about COVID. I just wanted to ask both of you, since it's, you know, something that we talk about on our webinars every single week, but and I'll open this to everybody, but I think we'll start with Chef Lamar and Dr. Conyers. But how has COVID affected your operations, and how are you adjusting to that? And we'll start with Chef Lamar. How about that?
Obviously, you know, here, I mean, it's kind of a weird space, but kind of a good space. I mean, obviously we were slated to, just to back everyone up, you know, a little bit. How I got involved with the restaurant is that I was on a show with Food Network, Vegas Chef Prize Fight. We taped last fall, and so I was the winner of the show. So initially we were to open in March of this year. That didn't happen, so that changed how we operated. When we began to open, we opened June 18th as a soft opening for 2 weeks up to July 3rd for open reservations. So first thing is that, you know, instead of 100% occupancy, we have 50% occupancy. Obviously, everyone's aware of social distancing. All of our employees from the front and the back of the house are all 6 feet apart from each other, which obviously changed how we contact. Because if you think, you know, people in the restaurant, we're kind of right up on each other face to face. You know, we're all in masks all the time, which, you know, obviously is very different. You know, we are, as far as Caesars Entertainment and how we operate all of our operations, we all operate the same. Our ordering, when we talk about, you know, just not just beef from an ordering standpoint, it's very different. We're used to being able to get product on the fly all day, all night. That doesn't happen anymore. We can place an order, you know, for something as simple as a box of gloves to come in on Monday, and then it'll come until Friday. And so what it does, it puts us in almost a pressure point to, you know, double order, and then, you know, hope for the best to expect it, and then be able to get it. You know, all of our product also comes through our centralized dock area, which is, you know, very quarantine, you know, as opposed to having a truck pull up, you know, it's in sealed boxes. I think you know, from an occupancy standpoint, people are excited about coming to the restaurant. Gratefully, we've been, you know, absolutely, you know, busy, but enough to where, you know, we space out our times. Obviously, there are no more than, you know, 5 people per table. If we get, you know, for example, a party of 20, you know, obviously they are set close to each other, but 6 feet apart, and only 5 people at the table. We just recently reopened the bars here in Las Vegas as of 12:01 a.m. on Sunday night, and the bars weren't open since I think late or early July. And what that means is that you couldn't sit people at the bar, but if you had, you can serve drinks from the bar to the tables, but no one was allowed to sit at the bars to, create and incur more social distancing here. So, in lieu of a lot of restaurants that have been either opening or closing, again, we opened June 18th and we have been steadily open, and we're only open 5 hours a week. 5 hours a day, which 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. And we're entertaining opening 7 days in a few weeks, just because, we've now have a steady, flow of people that are coming to the restaurant. So we've been very fortunate, blessed, and working in opening a restaurant in COVID has been challenging, but also good at the same time.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say so much on this one, but I think I would love for Josh or Buck to weigh in. And as a consumer, early on during COVID, I was under the impression with like slaughterhouses and stuff, we're getting backlog, and I think consumers would want to know, especially in this audience, who might want to know like how things are going back to somewhat of a normal.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that, Josh. So, we went through a period where there were a few plants that actually shut down. All of them were running slower than normal. And that's when we ran into the shortage at the grocery store. We were very happy to see that while the beef was completely gone, the plant-based beef was still there on the shelf. So that was, well, anyway, we didn't like not having beef, but we did like having them preferring our product. And so that slowly came back. I would say now we're probably 95 to 97% of what we were a year ago. We suspect that may stay that way because, they've got, you see the plexiglass in the grocery store, they're doing that between the workers on the lines. And so they probably will never get back to the speed they were at before this. And so it remains to be seen whether they'll be able to go back to whatever normal was. But I would say that we're in pretty good shape. There's a new plant going to be built in Idaho that will help. And the demand for our product is such that the processors have a lot of incentive to run as well as they can. And of course, they're incredibly efficient. All of agriculture has gotten so efficient. We do everything we used to and more with less land and less feed and all that. And they're doing the same thing. But I think that we're back to pretty normal on that. And if we can avoid any kind of lockdown close to what we had, I think we're going to be in pretty good shape. Josh, I'll let you correct me.
Yeah, I think that's all very accurate. 95% capacity roughly is what we're back to, and those plants can run on weekends, to make up some of their, efficiency losses for a regular 40-hour week if they need to make up a little. And to Chef Lamar's comment, on the cattle getting a little fatter, a little heavier, we did have a period of time where the slowdown at the packing plant backed up a little into the feed yard sector. But because cattle are pretty resilient and we can change their diet up a little bit. Folks like Buck can slow down the growth rate and put a little more forage and a little less corn and slow things down a little bit in that process. We were able to manage through our inventories on the live side. So we did not have an issue with, having to euthanize any animals due to the supply chain issues like some of the other commodities might have. So we're fortunate in our ability to manage cattle that way. And more prime product, more high choice product like CAB because of slowing the cattle down. But for most people, that's not a problem. I know, you can get over fat, but most people are just enjoying that higher marbling in the meat case. Dr. Conyers, we had talked a little bit in our prep about the regional plants too, and I think that Buck mentioned the economic incentive that the packing industry has found with some extra margin. I think that's really been seen in those regional plants and smaller plants with a lot of demand for them. And so I think that's a good thing in the long run. That gives them the capital they need to maybe expand a little bit, modernize some of their equipment, maybe train some more employees and add an employee or two. And for folks that do want to source locally, source some of these different types of products that were mentioned earlier, maybe that's grass-fed or local or the heritage breeds. Hopefully this will expand the ability of some of those niche markets to deliver. And typically that adds value to the whole industry because those are going to be at a much higher price point than you know, the beef that Buck so efficiently grows, because you do lose some efficiencies of scale when you go down to more of a niche market. And for instance, grass-fed, for those that prefer that, it does take longer to get those animals to market, and time is money, as the old saying goes. So if you have to own those cattle longer, and just some of the inputs there, and even the cost to process an animal at a smaller facility, you lose some efficiency over some of the larger packing plants. Overall, you know, more demand for the product, more choice, as we've all been talking about, is generally better. And you know, go out there and try something new, but know that folks like Buck and Katie and even our small operation still in Georgia, we sell into the commodity market, even though we're a small farm. You know, that's the choice we make to breed really high quality cattle, but still to go into a product that could be on your grocery store shelf. And as I mentioned, that beef quality assurance program earlier, pretty much all farmers and ranchers are getting educated in that and doing the right thing by their animals through education, whether they're marketing any of these channels. So you can feel confident whether you're buying from the meat case that it's folks like Buck and Katie or myself that are raising those cattle across the country for you.
And to piggyback a little off of what one thing Chef Lamar said about you know, the quality and so forth, and some good coming out of a bad situation. The last I knew, if you went to get what we call little locker plants, small processors that might do deer part of the time and hogs and cattle, I think it was next April before you could get in most of them. So people are wanting to go ahead and have a beef processed and have it in their freezer, you know, to not run into that situation where you walk in the grocery store and there's no product there. I don't see that happening again, because the grocery stores, if they'd have foreseen what was going to happen, they probably could have forestalled that. But, you know, this was everything in this whole COVID thing is new to everybody. And so, but that's something that's good. People are going to have freezer full of beef, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, I will say my mom, when COVID started and the lockdown started, panic bought like a ton of steaks, and our whole freezer, basically they're still eating steaks at home from what my mom bought. So she's maybe the biggest fan of beef and steak more specifically, and rare steak even more specifically than that, that I know at least. Maybe not than the people on this call, but she's a pretty big one. So we love that.
We love your mother.
I'll tell her, she'll be so thrilled. Amazing. So we have some time for questions. I know that there were a few that came in, so I want to get to those, but also just want to encourage the folks who are there in the audience, if you have any questions at all, just send them through and we will get them to our panelists here. But we had one question come in that was from Anna Karen, who wants to know, what is the breed that is consumed the most in the U.S.? I feel like anyone knows that. It's somebody on this call.
I'm sorry, could you say it again?
Yeah.
So the question was, what is the breed that's consumed the most in the U.S.? Or what's the most popular breed?
Well, it would be, most cattle are crossbred, so it's not just one breed. But as I mentioned, I think 75% of the herd now is black-hided, which means they've got Angus at some level in them. So I don't know if there is a most popular breed, but that would be, I think, the short answer to the question.
Cool. That's great. Short and sweet. And then the next question was, is it true, and I think this was a clarification, but is it true that most of the cattle that are sold for beef are male? And if that's true, then what happens to some of the female cows, or what does that look like?
Yeah,
Well,
I can start it, or Katie, if you want to jump in either way. But yeah, so cow-calf operations, they do, those cows don't last forever in that operation, so they do retain some females back into the breeding herd. So there is a slight edge to the steer candidates that go into the feed yard in the mix. But we do have a lot of females that also end up in the supply chain. Katie, go ahead and explain how you guys handle that.
Yeah, so I was just going to add, here on our farm, all the steer calves will automatically leave when they're weaned off their mothers. Kind of think about it, kids going to kindergarten, right? They're on to the next stage. And then we look at what's left of our females, and we look at how many cows need to go on vacation off the farm, right, to that next phase. And that'll kind of depend on how many females or young girls we keep back into the breeding program. Usually on our farm, we'll keep anywhere from 25 to 50% of the females. So this year, with the calves currently on the ground, perfectly half are steer calves, so they'll leave when it's time to wean them, and then we'll look at the remaining females and we'll probably cut them in half. Those half will go to town with the steer calves, and then the other half will stay here and will be bred, and then will turn into mature cows.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Cool. So just as a consumer and a home cook, what are some tips? What are some things that people can look for when trying to identify a good cut of meat? Are there any kind of surefire indicators? What should we be looking at?
You know, it depends on, well, the chefs need to do this. I'll shut up.
I was gonna jump in there. That's okay. You know, when I'm looking at, you know, beef, if it's prepackaged, obviously making sure that it's nice and ruby red. There is no gray discoloring. There is an expiration date on the package. You know, if it's I think you brought up, Buck was about to mention probably the type of cut. So, you know, if I'm buying, obviously ribeye, I'm looking for nice marbling, meaning you can see, you know, nice, you know, fat distribution to meat ratio. You know, that ensures some freshness. If it's, you know, behind the cage, most of the time, you know, if I'm going to go purchase steak at a store, I'd rather get it from behind the cage, because I feel like, you know, I'm right in front of a butcher, and that's their job to kind of, you know, navigate you to, you know, the type of meat you want. And just like ourselves as professionals, they pretty much know, you know, if you, hey, I want to cook, you know, I want to barbecue some steak, you know, what's your best cut you got, or, you know, do you give me some pointers on what I can do with that? So I go to the cage quite a bit, you know, or behind the counter, you know, take your ticket number and wait for your cut to be, you know, sliced right in front of you. But again, from a pre-packaged standpoint, one other point too, you know, sometimes I'll take the package and I'll slightly tilt it, because you want to make sure that the beef is not old, and if it is, you'll see a lot of the blood that's starting to, you know, seep out of the beef, and that's something that you don't want. You know, and last but not least, I kind of cherry pick a little bit too. So, you know, I know in the stores a lot of times, like, the newer stuff is in the back and the older stuff's in the front. Not saying that any of it's old. So I usually grab the steaks from the back as opposed to the front of the ones on the bottom, because those are new stuff that's on the bottom. So just as a little tidbit.
Man, you gave some good tips. I don't know if I have anything more, but I mean, I'm personally, from a beef point of view, I mean, for the steaks, I just love a bone-in steak. I don't know. I believe it's something in the cooking process that the bone adds some flavor that you don't get. I know a lot of people love fillets, but I just love that bone in. But a lot of people think that's wasted money, but that's just a personal preference.
Yeah, you can get your
I would
money's
just
worth.
add, get to know you.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Katie.
I was going to say, I would just add on to what Chef Lamar and the doctor said, is just get to know your meat manager, get to know your butcher, ask them questions. It's their job. They're the experts.
Yeah, and I was gonna say you can get your money's worth from the bone in if you just like eat the whole bone and really go after it like a caveman, which is what I do. So it's embarrassing, but what are you gonna do? It's the best part. At least I think so. It's
You and my wife, she loves tomahawks, and they're about 2.5, 3 inches thick, and she looks like a coyote gnawing on that bone.
You know, I was gonna mention that. I mean, for two things. You know, one, we're actually entertaining putting bone marrow on the menu. We feel like we want clientele to do that. You know, I grew up as a child where I watched my granny eat bone marrow all the time, and you know, the chefs and I were talking about adding that to the menu. And you know, Dr. Howard, you're talking about a bone-in steak. I mean, we have a really nice tomahawk. So if you're heading this way, my friend, we got a nice steak for you.
Okay.
amazing. Well, unless there are any other questions, I think that's all I have for this group today. I'm sure we'll get some more things that come in after the fact as people watch this recording. But I just want to thank you all so much for being here. This was really, really informative. I wish you could see my paper. It's all kind of chicken scratch, but I wrote down everything because this was really incredible. Just to recap, I feel like a lot of the big things that we talked about were just getting to know your suppliers, taking the opportunity to go to their farms if possible, and then you can meet people like Buck and Kiwi and Josh and have them tell you a little bit about their operation. Stuff like, you know, all cows are grass-fed, which was really interesting, that they're all grass-fed. It's just about how they're finished, and that's kind of a common misconception, which I think is really important for people to know. That was one of the other big takeaways. Yeah, and so much more. So this will be, again, available as a recording if you want to come back and revisit any of these tips. But thank you all so much for being here. This was really, really great. And thank you, Debbie, for running the slides. Debbie is behind the scenes, but set up everything and did everything. So we love her and we appreciate her. So thank you for that. But thank you and thanks for joining. This was great. And we hope to see you next week when we talk about different cuts and underutilized beef and stuff. Awesome.
Thanks, everyone. Nice
Thanks.
job.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
All right.